9th of France had up to 100,000 people killed in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Religion. It's got a few kinks to work out. Sure, it's got the good stuff like, treat your neighbour right, honour thy mother, afterlife, what have you. But it really needs to address the small problem of, being the reason for nearly all wars ever in the history of forever. And the St. Bartholomew Day massacre is testament to the extreme nature of religious zealots. The French wars of religion of the late 1500s centred around many groups of French people leaving the main body of the Roman Catholic Church and founding different subsects based off this doctrine. Now, King Charles IX, obviously annoyed about not being that all-important 10th Charlie, still managed to be a decent about the whole thing and ordered one of these groups known as the French Calvinist Protestants to be eliminated, solely because he saw their movements as a threat to his own beliefs. Therefore, on the night of the King's sister's wedding, Charles gave the word and 5,000 Protestant members attending the wedding were killed. Panic and violence spread throughout the city, and after a night of ruthless bloodshed, over 100,000 Protestants were believed to have been killed. Number 7. The Jewish Nakam poisoned 400 Nazi war criminals with bread containing arsenic. It's perhaps understandable that in the aftermath of the Holocaust, some Jewish groups could simply not accept the justice handed out during the Nuremberg show trials, and instead wanted to exact their own revenge. One infamous group was named the Nakam, also known as the Jewish Avengers. Yet, instead of a Hanukkah Hawkeye and a Thor with a giant dreidel, these men and women alongside other Jewish splinter groups began to locate and assassinate Nazi war criminals by any means possible. Around 60 members of the group arrived in Germany in the aftermath of World War II. And they allegedly poisoned 3,000 loaves of bread which were sent to former SS guards at the American POW camp Stalag 13. Some 1,900 prisoners became ill with arsenic poison, with up to 400 dying as a result. Number 6. Blinded Enrico Dandolo sacked Constantinople. Enrico Dandolo, the 42nd Doge of Venice and obvious visual meme pun, is most famous for being blind, and despite his disability was able to take a leading role in the Fourth Crusade and the sack of Constantinople in the early 13th century. With Venice the major financial backer of the Fourth Crusade, Dandolo decided to take up the cross himself and exact his revenge upon the Byzantine Empire, who he cursed for his visual affliction after losing it in a confrontation with their men some years before. So on April 12, 1204, the blind Dandolo managed to lead the Crusaders into Constantinople, sacking the city over the next 3 days, destroying priceless artworks and holy sanctuaries, as well as killing up to 15,000 Byzantines. Number 5. Aaron Burr shot his political rival in a duel. It's fair to say that fathers of the American Revolution, Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, didn't like each other very much, and they eventually settled their differences via the very 19th century method of a duel. You see, Hamilton had the habit of influencing the outcomes of elections, and he launched a smear campaign against Burr's candidacy when he ran for president, which Burr believed cost him the position. Understandably angered by the aftermath of this, Burr went to Hamilton, and then less understandably, challenged Hamilton to an illegal duel. Despite dueling having been outlawed in New York on July 11, 1804, the pair met outside Weehawken, New Jersey, and Hamilton was mortally wounded by a shot. That'll show him, thought Burr. Only moments later, probably realizing that shooting somebody in an illegal manner, rated in April 1945, American soldiers found more than 2,000 bodies stuffed into 39 train cars on the rails just outside. And this, coupled with the devastation they discovered in the compound itself, unleashed a brutal reaction. Up to 30 SS guards were lined up along a wall in the coal yard and executed by machine gun fire without trial, although the person who pulled the trigger claimed that they had tried to escape. Yet it didn't stop there, because allegedly some of the 35,000 liberated inmates were given handguns by the US soldiers. They then tortured and killed a number of SS officers, including some being beaten to death with shovels and hammers, and even one man being torn apart by inmates. These incidents did not come to light until the official documents were released in the early 2000s, and they have since marred the liberation of the camp by US soldiers. Number 3. Genghis Khan slaughtered 4 million people after having his offer of a peace treaty rebuffed. Genghis Khan was not a particularly nice bloke, responsible for millions of death, entire cultures being devolved into nothingness, and he invented a rudimentary postal system, meaning he's the real reason behind why your packages are always late. Utter bastard, right? The Mongol invasion of Khwarezmia between 1219 and 1221 saw the expansion of Khan's empire into the Islamic states, as well as the murder of up to 4 million civilians. And this all came about because Khwarezmia refused to trade with him. When Khan set out a caravan to a Khwarezmian city, his men were killed. So Khan calmly said, okay, fine, you want to be like that? Okay, fine. And then he used insider fiscal trading to collapse the stock market, thus flushing the Khwarezmians out of the city. I'm kidding, of course, because he did the much more reasonable thing of pouring molten silver into the mouths of those who did it, and then led a 200,000 strong Mongol force into Khwarezmia, storming through the entire empire, killing 1 million soldiers and another 3 million civilians, insisting that not even dogs or cats be spared. Number 2. Mossad agents sent letters to the families of Palestinian terrorists just before murdering them. The Munich massacre saw 11 Israeli Olympic team members taken hostage by the Palestinian splinter group Black September and then murdered along with a German police officer during the 1972 games. Although 5 of the 8 Black September members were killed by West German police and the other 3 were arrested, the survivors were eventually released following a Lufthansa airline hijacking in October of the same year. In response to this, Israeli intelligence agency Mossad launched several missions in order to track down and murder all Palestinians suspected of involvement in the Munich Olympic massacre. Hunting down these Palestinian splinter forces over the next 2 decades, tens were killed. And before they were murdered, their families would receive flowers and a condolence card reading, "We don't forgive, and we don't forget." Number 1. An Indian sex offender was castrated and murdered by 200 women he allegedly raped while standing in the dock during his trial. On August 13, 2004, Akku Yadav was standing trial in Kustabar Nagar, India. Yet this was a man who allegedly raped more than 200 women over a 10-year period, and they came back to exact their brutal and ferocious revenge while he stood there in dock. The women had been laughed at and dismissed by police forces when they reported that Yadav and his gang committed hundreds of rapes around Kustabar Nagar, and so they took the law into their own hands. A lynch mob of the 200 women descended upon the court, running past horrified officials and pushing Yadav to the ground, before hacking him to death in a 15-minute assault. Throwing chili pepper in his face and hurling stones at him, one woman sliced off his